We are back with Amanda Knox. In the first episode, Amanda shared her journey, a harrowing journey, one that none of us can imagine. But she's also done something great since this journey has been a bit behind her. She has evolved. She has brought her knowledge. She has brought so much to each and every one of us to learn how any of us can go through something so horrendous and maybe come out a little differently. Not necessarily at all what we were, but to move through it a little bit. She explained how she went through something very tragic in 2007, went through, I think, two acquittals, two convictions. She definitively was found not guilty of her roommate's death in 2015 and has since rebuilt herself in a new way. She wrote a book, two books. She's been on podcasts. She's a public speaker. And now I think she's even a little bit of a comedian. So we've been seeing her really evolve and appreciate that sort of journey she's gone through. During her last time here, we spoke about some of the mantras, the how-tos that I am trying to bring to each and every one of you because they are so critical. And we have dug down deep in a few of them. Freedom is practice. Pain is inevitable. Suffering is a choice. Forgiveness as freedom and forgiveness without apology. If you're stuck, choose freedom. And now this one that I really want to dig into a little bit because it's an amazing story. I don't know if you were all aware of this story, but to me, it is one of those stories that if you ever go through something traumatic, bad, whatever, this to me, at least from what Amanda's explained, this agency as clarity, I think is really that little bit of a secret sauce that many of us probably don't realize is missing that can really make a difference in our life. So I want to dig into that a little bit, Amanda. We touched on it a little bit in part one, but tell me a little bit about your decision to do something that many of us would think would be off the table. And if I was your mom, I'd say, no, no, Amanda, not going. But you went to, yeah, you faced the very man that nearly took your life away. You did.
Yeah.
Let's hear it.
Yeah, I tackled the beast. No, I'm just kidding. I love that you call it the secret sauce because I think you're right. In the last episode where we were talking, I talked about how I was not really driven to meet with my prosecutor out of a sense of wanting to forgive him. That was not like something that was important to me per se. It was more that I was driven by the fact that I did not understand him. I did not understand how a person who believed themselves to be a good person could make such devastating choices that had harmed so many innocent people. I could not understand it. And so, if anything, I was driven from a place of curiosity. I really wanted to understand him. And so, I reached out to him and I asked him if he would meet with me. Well, at this point, I was already fluent in Italian, so the language wasn't a barrier anymore. However, you're right. Like, how do you reach out to your prosecutor? I had only ever encountered him in my interrogation room and in the courtroom. That was all I knew him from. However, I did meet someone in the prison named Don Saulo, who was the prison chaplain, my dearest friend in the prison environment, who also happened to know my prosecutor on a personal level because Perugia is a very small town. And he actually had been my prosecutor's priest for a long time when my prosecutor was growing up. So that we had this connection, this mediator. And I asked my friend, Don Saulo, to deliver a letter to my prosecutor, whose name is Giuliano Magnini. And at first, Giuliano Magnini didn't know if he was even allowed to read a letter from me. It was like just unheard of. He didn't know if there were like legal implications. He was worried that there might be some kind of like legal problem with a prosecutor and a former defendant.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I get. You're right. He probably was like, "Well, this is unusual." But listen, again, your case was unusual, so all the cards are off the table for that. Yeah.
Right. And so when I reached out to him, I had a choice about how I was going to confront this conversation. And I knew that if I were to come out guns blazing, WTF, like, why did you do this to me? You knew it was wrong. Like, I knew that he would just get defensive and adversarial again, because that was what our whole relationship had been up to this point, was adversarial, because it was within the justice system. It was an adversarial justice system. And so by its very nature, that dictated the terms of our relationship. And I felt like if I were to approach him in an adversarial way, he was just going to dig in his heels, entrench himself further into his own perspective, and not be willing to actually find common
What
ground
must
with
have been
me.
running through
And so,
your head up until
yes.
that meeting? What was the first word you were going to say? Were you going to shake his hand? Were you not? Were you going to sit? Were you going to look at him eye to eye? Were you going to smile? Were you not? I can only imagine, given what you went through, what must have been racing through your head. Well, I'm sure your mom told you that.
Yeah. Well, especially when I told my parents what my plan was, they were just like, why? Or, at this point, I was also very deeply involved with innocence work and the innocence movement. I'm an advocate for criminal justice reform in the United States now. And all of my friends within that community, lawyers, scientists, other wrongly convicted people, all of them told me that it was a waste of my time, that prosecutors never admit that they are wrong. He will never be able to he will never be able to come to see you as the person you really are, because he has this idea of you in his head that he cannot let go of, because it is so a part of his identity that you're a villain. And I heard all of that, and yet I didn't believe it, because deep, deep down, I felt like my prosecutor was not an evil person. He was just a man who had made a very grave mistake. And that already positioned me in such a way to have compassion for him. Like, I was like, it must be really hard to be him. And whether or not he is aware of, or like whether or not he has consciously acknowledged to himself the mistake that he made, nevertheless, this has been one of the most contentious case of his life that has come to define his career. He's done, hundreds, thousands of cases. And yet this one case where he got it so wrong is like a defining moment in his life. And I had compassion for him. And so when I approached speaking to him, I was like, well, maybe the reason why this hasn't worked before is because everyone is so entrenched in that adversarial perspective. What if I come at him with common ground? What if I come at him acknowledging that himself could have felt hurt or misrepresented or misunderstood in the course of this whole ordeal? Absolutely. And so the lead into that conversation was me going, Dr. Juliana Mignini, I don't know who you are. And, I've been in a courtroom with you hundreds of times, but I don't know who you are. And I don't think you know who I am. And, I've seen interviews with you in the media. I've seen how the way the media talks about you, and it's not nice. And I've seen how the media talks about me, and it's not nice. And I feel like, just like I was misrepresented in the media, you probably feel misrepresented in the media too. And I want to know who you really are. I really want to understand you.
The curiosity. Yeah. You sort of did. You sort of wanted just to understand, because that was going to help you probably get a little closer to that curiosity piece of saying, how did this all happen? Right?
How did this all happen? What can we do to prevent these kinds of things in the future? All of that comes from seeing the world clearly, which is a little bit getting back to that mantra that we were chatting about at the beginning, which is like the only way that you can see the world, or like you can effectively engage in the world, is if first you see it clearly. And if I had written off my prosecutor as an evil tyrant, I wasn't going to be able to make choices to affect change in a positive way, because I would have been working with a fantasy. I would have been making choices about a fantasy, and it probably would have been unethical, because, just like my prosecutor sought to punish me for a fantasy, if I just was convinced in my head that he was a monster, I would feel compelled to punish him too. And that's not what I wanted to do.
Someone hurts you tremendously in that respect, and you kind of create this whole scenario in your head a little bit. And you coming face to face to him must have put something in a different way. It must have put him a little bit on defense, because now he's having to speak with you in a totally different way than how you were imprisoned. But it's just takes away a lot of those crazy thoughts that we have, or the, like you said, the fantasy that we have as this person's just a mean whatever, and it makes it more human. So tell me about your journey there. Did you have any fear? Was there any fear that anything could happen to you once nothing could happen to you? You were definitively fine, but like, was it a little scary? Oh, exactly. You're absolutely right. But nothing bad could happen to you. Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
not
that's
that I
true.
hadn't done anything bad the first time and I got sent to prison. So I mean, there's no guarantee. I mean, everything bad could happen to me. Like, well, I don't want to give away too much because the show portrays this, but yes, like, but I will say that and I think this is the bigger thing. Yes, I was absolutely terrified going into this encounter. And I was terrified in large part. There was the concerns about, like, okay, well, my mom especially was concerned about, oh, is he going to try to frame you for some other crime? Is he going to try to have you arrested? Like, is something badly going to happen like that? Yes, the boogeyman thought. But my biggest concern was that because at this point, by the time I actually got on a plane and got to Perugia and was about to meet him in person, years had gone by. Like when I first reached out to him, it was in 2019, and then the pandemic happened. So I wasn't going anywhere during the pandemic, but during the pandemic, I corresponded with him throughout. So we spent years communicating via email prior to me arriving. And what was difficult was that he was inconsistent. Like sometimes he would be very warm and accommodating and complimentary and seemingly on the brink of like a breakthrough and, a mea culpa. And then alternatively, he would be very defensive and very more deeply entrenched in his worldview. And so, because he was very hard to tease apart that way, at least when it came to his perception of the case, it didn't feel like I really knew where he stood. And that was really tough because where he stands still has a deep like implications in my life. It's, because of him there are people who still believe horrible things about me and, send me death threats. So like this is a still like open wound that has not been, healed over. And over the course of those 2 years of us corresponding, I realized that I was making a huge mistake, which was that I was looking to my prosecutor, to my adversary, to this person who hurt me as the means by which I would be healed. That was a huge mistake because what that meant was that if I was going to Perugia hoping that he would, come around and say I was wrong and I'm sorry and all of that, all of the things, all of the acknowledgments that I just so desperately wanted, if that was my goal, I was going to fail and I would be setting myself up for more pain. Instead, what I realized was that the obstacle between me and my own well-being was not my prosecutor, but myself. There was something in me that needed to be expressed for me to get to a place of well-being. And that expression was what I ultimately arrived at in my conversation with my prosecutor, which, I describe in my book. It's going to be depicted in the TV show, so I hope people will watch it. But like, I think the thing that really shifted things for me was that realization. If everything depended on me being able to show up and present my case and give my prosecutor what I had to give him, then I couldn't fail. Then I was effectively a superhero. I was unstoppable. And once that settled in, I felt so at peace. I felt like it's the one time in my life that I felt like deeply like in flow with the universe. Like everything was just working in the same direction. Everything was flowing. And so I arrived at that meeting with a deep sense of reassurance. And my only fear was that at the last minute, like seeing him in person, it would be so triggering that I would be sort of shocked back into a state of like defensiveness and fear. And that was my concern.
Can you explain to the audience, though, when we're talking about what do you mean by agency? And again, she goes really deep in this in the book, and I really found the book in a lot of ways just very good with life lessons and teaching on how to kind of overcome anything. But you felt like you reclaimed a bit of your agency. What does that mean?
So, what that means, so agency is your ability to be effective, to do things in your life, to make meaningful choices, right? And I think for a very long time, I've felt justifiably thwarted that like I wasn't the protagonist of my own life. I was the pawn of someone else's. and that I didn't have any real way of meaningful choices that would have that would like make an impact, that would make a difference in my life. I felt that was that learned helplessness. And it was again this like shift in perspective of realizing like, oh, I actually do have the ability to make choices. It just requires me being willing to be curious about outcomes where there is no, path ahead of me, and to be compassionate towards the people that I might encounter. So, like, even just the choice to reach out to my prosecutor was an expression of agency in my life. And it came because I realized that even though everyone told me I couldn't do it or I shouldn't do it, a deep, deep part of me was feeling, compelled, propelled, motivated to do this thing and to make this choice that I didn't have to make. I did not have to reach out to my prosecutor. This was not just me surviving a bad situation. This was me actively processing and choosing to enter into a relationship with someone in a new way. The process of that helped me reframe what this person meant in my life. And the ultimate outcome for me was, yes, I went there to understand him, but what I came away with was realizing that of the two of us, I was the one who actually had more power in our relationship than he did. And I realized that, again, like I had more power for choosing for myself. And I now had the responsibility of holding him in my hands. And for the first time, and realizing that, like, my willingness to be open and curious and compassionate towards him had
Or
rendered
you probably never
him.
really thought about that, and then you experienced that, and then what does that make you feel like? I want to understand this before kind of, you don't really have a lot of support. No one really is kind of saying, "Hey, man, a great idea," right? Regardless, you go because again, you're realizing this is part of sort of a what you need to do to get whatever next step it is. What's it feel like afterwards? And I'm talking not just short time term, but long term. Does that feel better? What did it feel like when you walked out?
Well, I felt like I was finally free. Like I finally figured out what freedom looked like in my life. And it didn't mean sort of ignoring or pretending that the bad things that happened to me didn't exist. And it also didn't mean feeling like I was trapped, that I was forever defined by those things. It was instead, I'm informed by them. I am propelled by them. I am motivated by them. But that doesn't mean that I don't get to make my own choices. And I made choices based upon my own principles and my own, like what I believed was right. And again, these were choices that I made that didn't have to be made. Ooh, and my husband is telling me that I need to go pick up our daughter.
What I wanted to ask at the very end is if there are 2 or 3 things that you would say to women, like, "Hey, listen, these are the things you gotta remember to do." What would be 2 or 3 things you say that you need it in your life so that if you go through something like this, you are good?
Okay, so again, the first one is that you are worth it. You have inherent value. So do not let anyone ever try to convince you otherwise. Two, one of the best ways of diffusing like the dread and overwhelm of a horrible experience is to be curious about it. Because, like, even our most painful experiences are worth exploring, are worth examining. And it's interesting how the examination of a painful thing will give you a deeper perspective that actually lightens the load. It's weird. It's like by going deeper, you suddenly feel lighter. And then maybe a third thing might be we are not islands. We do not exist alone. And that's both a blessing and a curse, right? Like we belong to people, and that is great. But also, we belong to people. And that means that we have a responsibility. That means that we are beholden.
Well, thank you, and I don't wanna keep you late from picking up your children. Your children are very lucky to have you because I think they're gonna be very strong little women and grow up to be wonderful women. So I just wanna say, folks, if you like this show and it sparks something special in you, please leave a review, a comment. That's the way to help the show grow. And please, I'm not gonna say anything more. Amanda said it all. You need to follow exactly what she said because she told you exactly how to do it.